you mentioned that measurement may never be perfect, but marketers shouldn't let perfect be the enemy of good. But how do we know for sure what is good enough? Maybe perfect is the enemy of good, but in this case, the scarier part is that inaccuracy is also the corruption of good, and what you think is good enough maybe isn't good enough.
When you're talking about 12 months, 18 months, don't tell me that most of your data points are missing from the CRM, because if you do, I'll say we need someone else for the team. What were you doing for the last 12 months? We were running all of these different campaigns, right? So you can collect more data than you realize, but I think people focus on what they can't collect, and it becomes the beginning and the end. I'm like, cannot move further because this over here, I cannot bring it in.
What's up, everyone? Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Nadia Davis, VP of Marketing at CaliberMind. CaliberMind is a multi-touch attribution and GTM intelligence platform. In this episode, we explore the periodic table of marketing attribution elements, how to decide when attribution data is good enough to guide strategy, treating multi-touch attribution as an analytical tool, and exploring chain-based attribution models for B2B marketers. All that and a bunch more stuff after a super quick word from one of our awesome partners.
This episode is brought to you by Revenue Hero.
2 field forms. Complete context, instant scheduling. Finally, you get to pick all 3 without a single line of code. Introducing native enrichment by Revenue Hero. Plug in Clearbit, Crust Data, Apollo, or stack all 3. Enrich all the data you need instantly on Submit. Stack your enrichment providers, waterfall your way to clarity. Determine qualification and meeting routing based on enriched information. Layer it onto your current distribution logic. Book more meetings with your qualified buyers. Get started at revenuehero.io.
Nadia, thank you so much for your time today. Really excited to chat.
Well, I'm definitely a first-time caller, but long-time listener, so super pumped to be here.
Awesome. Appreciate you saying that.
I love it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And congrats on the State of 2025 Attribution Report. This report must have been a massive undertaking, and I'm a big fan of the periodic table. So can you let's start off by bringing us behind the scenes. Like, how did this all come together? What did you do? Please tell us about it.
Definitely. Well, the place that it came from is definitely defined by labor of love. I've been, this is my first stunt on the marketing technology vendor side. I've been on the side of brands or consumers of attribution, right? And to me, being always in the demand gen roles, performance roles, revenue marketing roles, with kind of bearing into operations, I've always executed against KPIs or certain metrics, certain deliverables. And it was not really an option. It's just like the nature of the business. You are hired to hit this specific goal, right? So you're working towards it. And I've always used attribution as like a tool of the trade, right? You have your toolbox, you have different questions, you use different things to answer those questions and to measure them, right? So you can tell the story to the rest of the business why they should keep the lights on in your department for the next month or the next quarter, whatever, right? And when I switched from being a client of CaliberMind over to being the head of marketing for CaliberMind, I started paying attention to this kind of riffraff in the market and this whole, I don't know if it's the social echo chamber, but seems like it spreads further. This whole notion of attribution is dead. Well, like everything else that's dead, right? Didn't you say yesterday that SEO is dead, ABM is dead? Like whatever it was, now it's dead. So knowing that I have these fantastic, talented people in my network, I was like, well, I want to research this further. I want to understand the sentiment. I mean, I came through the lines of like data and statistics and, business degrees and marketing analytics degrees, the market research kind of background. And I wanted to kind of put some effort into understanding the market sentiment, because it seems like there's very much of a disconnect. This side over here, usually SMBs, are claiming that everything is dead. Okay, well, maybe you failed, maybe you tried, didn't work out. So what do you say? It's dead, right? And you move on for the next silver bullet. However, on the enterprise side, these people are not like taking to social to proclaim everything's dead. They're quietly doing the work and they're seeing the results and they're applying things in a significant statistical way, right? So that was kind of part of it. I want to understand, why is there such a dichotomy of opinions? The other side, like why the attribution table or the revenue marketing kind of periodic table take, right? to me, it's never one thing as a means to an end. Well, there is the multi-touch attribution as an obelisk of all things marketing measurement, right? It's never that. It's like so many things that may seem completely disconnected, may seem nuanced, may seem not related. That's like the elements within the periodic table, within, the world of chemistry. However, they all come together within a bigger ecosystem where there is the method to the madness of how they all are interrelated. And I feel like in a lot of cases, when you think about like even, the notion of Titanic hitting the iceberg, right? What you could see is the tip of the iceberg. I'm like, the iceberg took out the Titanic, the visible part. It wasn't that. It was the underwater part that took it out. And that's parts of these pillars within the periodic tables of, it's not just attribution by itself. It's the fact that there's data modeling component. There's the measurement framework and foundation component. There's the cross-functional alignment component, like all of these things that make up the periodic table. And in grade school, chemistry was one of those things that was really, really hard for me. Like, I remember in 8th grade, I cheated on chemistry. I hate to admit that, but I cheated because I couldn't remember the valency of certain elements. And like, when I think about this world of many things that are complex, that require a certain degree of sophistication to understand and apply it properly because it's a framework, I couldn't think of any better way to bring it all together. I mean, could it be a map? Sure, it could be, like some GPS type of theme. Could it be something else? But to me, the periodic table spoke to the notion of groups of related things, seemingly unrelated, but all coming together within one ecosystem. So it's a long-winded way of answering your question, but that's the background.
It's
Yeah.
super cool. We'll put it up on the screen for folks that are watching on YouTube. When you first shared that on LinkedIn, I was like, oh, interested with just the visual, and then you kind of like zoom in and you see all the different terms, and then you have them laid out at the bottom, and it's like it's true. There's so many things, and there's so much context behind attribution, and we're gonna dive into some of this stuff here. But one of my favorite parts of the report was on page 6, I think, where you call out the core conflict of marketing measurement. And this is something I've like dabbled and debated with a lot of different guests on the show, and also in my like in-house career. Marketing is and should always be first about creativity and trying new things, being different, bold experiments, right? But then finance and measurement are built on things like causality and decimals and perfect science and stat sig. There's conflicting like ideas there for sure. Do you think that because of this, marketing teams are unfairly scrutinized compared to other departments? Like, why does marketing need to prove ROI for everything that we do? We need to justify our existence. But HR and product and finance, like those departments, like they don't have to be accountable to revenue. They just kind of exist. They're just like a thing that companies need to do. Why does marketing need to prove their existence? Like, why is everything tied back to ROI for us?
I should have got a degree in accounting. I mean, I like the class. I mean, it was interesting, right? But I think, like doing the research for this report, talking to multiple people, listening to endless podcasts, there's like a ton of really good CMO podcasts. This one theme was crystal clear that's across all segments of the market. Marketing is the most dynamic function within the C-suite because when you lead marketing, you're that one person that embodies the very creative kind of psychological engagement arousing side of how you get people's attention, how you stay memorable, how you, drive recall for your product or service. And then there's the other side, which is completely different, which is STEM, which is stats, which is data science. And if somebody told me that, it's like it's easy to gravitate from over here to over there, and every other person has that within their brain. I'm like, I'm sorry, that's just not true. I saw the stat somewhere, and I forget the source, but ultimately they said that 9 out of 10 marketers would have the background in degrees other than math, stats, data science, right? So you have traditionally like the Mad Men era, the advertising era of marketing where the discipline was heavily rooted, came from arousing that, response, that attention, that ask for certain things. And then the world of consumers, it's still so. But in B2B, it's different. And why is it different? It's because, your sales cycles are longer, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it's also because you have so many VCs, you have so many Ps that give you money, and you have to be accountable for that money. Now, if we compare all the other departments, does accounting have a budget? Not anything the size of the marketing budget. Does finance have a budget? Does sales have a budget? They got a little bit of the T&E, right? But not something massive. Millions of dollars I entrusted with you to spend it, or rather invest it in ways that benefit the business. Now, if I went to a retirement plan, 401k or whatever, or a stock company, and said, here's my money, and I don't really care how you invest it and how it performs. I just feel like it's the cost of doing business because everybody else invests in their retirement, right? Like nobody does that. Everybody wants to understand, how is my money working? And this is where the notion of we give you money, we have to understand what you're doing with it. And I think the challenge comes within the marketing world is that you have those 9 out of 10 people, however, I mean, maybe it's 8 out of 10, these days, or whatever that statistic is, right? Because I feel like marketing analytics has become the degree people reach for. But you have these people that really have hard time grasping that you are not here because it's the cost of doing business like it is for other departments. You might try other departments if, this is not it for you, but you're here because you got money to spend that we invested with you, and we want to have the responsible output from how this money is performing. And I think it's a very challenging concept for a lot of people to grasp, especially if they come from brand, if they come from product marketing, if they come from comms. And a lot of CMOs today, they still come from that background. Like if you look at a bigger company, a lot of CMOs would come through the lines of product marketing, kind of rose through the ranks. And sometimes even demand gen, like you could say it's a borderline function between kind of the creative side and the measurement side. But even demand gen, in a lot of cases, I mean, I had demand gen managers who had comms degrees, right? And they were challenged with like the kind of going above and beyond doing complex math calculations. But that's where the notion is. And then you have the other departments all within the C-suite. You have your finance person sitting here, you have your head of sales sitting here. They are dealing with binary data. It's like you have pipeline or you don't have pipeline. And in marketing, we are driving engagement. We are driving recall. We are driving the psychological response that's going to influence the behavior. And how do you take that and translate that to people that measure the world in black and white? They measure the world in dollars because PEs invest with you in dollars. VCs give you money in dollars. And for you to go and say, well, they generated XYZ clicks, and had we not done this campaign, we would have saved or lost this much money. It's not the answer that they're looking for. So unfortunately, it's just the name of the game in the world of, performance marketing, especially when it comes to SaaS and tech, when the VCP presence and that return on investment increase so strong.
Totally. And you know what? I've never heard it said like that. Like, why does marketing always have to prove themselves? And it's just like you said, it's because they're the ones with the budget. And that makes complete sense to me. And I don't know why I never thought of it that way. But that makes a ton of sense. I also think that there's a lot of conflict because no one can really, people continually struggle around measuring the value of brand. And, when you walk into a room and you're a salesperson and the prospect already has heard about your company and has heard great things about your company, what's the value of that? Some would say that's almost priceless. It changes everything. And I think that that's another reason why this concept of attribution is so contentious.
I'm sure it's like that MasterCard commercial. It's priceless. What's the value of this? Standing on top of the mountain, looking at
Yes.
the world. It's priceless, right? And that's the B2C side of things, right? That's where the sale goes faster. But you're right. And I think also people have this discomfort with a certain degree of uncertainty. Not knowing is such a big issue for a lot of people. And Phil, you had someone, and maybe Daryl, you were on that episode too. It was Joshua Cantor, ConvertML, the guy who founded the company. He was talking about this notion of like, some people want answers from their data. They cannot stand the fact that you cannot get to 99.9% certainty. Data tells us what to do. I had someone who was leading brand who would refuse to come up with names for a virtual webinar series for the next year until I told her how the names of the previous year's series performed. It's like, well, how do you expect me to answer that question? But we're data driven. We have to know how these things perform before we come up with the next year's episodes. So see, like there's this kind of dichotomy of some people that have to have 100%, and then other people, they just need to confirm that gut feel and know they're moving in the right direction, and it helps them make a better decision. And I think that's what separates those who flourish in the world of business and can move fast and can make decisions with, certain risk and ambiguity. It's almost like gambling, right? Like how much risk can you take? But the world is moving fast, so you don't have the luxury to sit there and collect everything that you can and then say, I finally feel so good about my data. I got everything. Oh, wait, it's 18 months later, right?
Yeah, I love your take, Nadia. I think that in most tech companies, specifically, marketing typically does have one of the bigger spend budgets. And I agree with you in a sense, like we get this idea that the budget that we have is used to spend on performance stuff and part of it's spent on like tech and stuff. But there is still a budget for some of these other teams. Like, sales still has a bunch of stuff like incentives. We're paying the team like commissions. There's like cost of goods sold, overhead expenses. These sales teams are like traveling. They're doing a bunch of like in-person stuff, right? So sales, like especially in bigger enterprise sales-led motions, oftentimes the sales budget will be bigger than the marketing budget. The one I have the most trouble with is the product department budget. Like typically, I remember like being in house and we have like headcount negotiations with the senior management team, and we're fighting for like 5 new people on marketing, and product just has a roadmap of 17 new people that they're hiring in the next quarter. And it's like, okay, we're assigning an ROI to every single person on marketing. They're going to be doing product marketing. They're going to be helping Martech. They're going to be jumping on ads. But the product team doesn't have to do any of that allocation. Like they just assign people to a new thing, that new feature on the roadmap. And no one is asking the product team, like, what's the ROI on that feature that we're going to add in there? Like, what's the ROI of these 4 people that we're at? Like, why is that the case for marketing and it's not the case for product? I feel like you already kind of answered that, but that was my only like, like takeaway there. Like other teams do have budgets, and some companies, like I have some friends that work at big enterprise, and like the marketing budget is like 6% of budgets. Like it's a tiny sliver. They're barely doing SEM stuff. So yeah, what are your thoughts, sir?
I feel like certain departments are viewed as mission critical to business success.
Yeah.
Product, in my view, is one of those. If we don't do X, Y, Z, then we all going to fail. Then this is not going to work. And whatever we have today, we might lose that. I mean, this is like the extreme view of what it is, right?
Yeah.
But within marketing, there's one thing, the depth of marketing and the variety, this dynamic side of marketing. Like many other functions do not take the time, nor should they, to understand, kind of get immersed, because it is a certain, it's a skill set that gets acquired over decades, not something that you explain overnight and then people assume they can do it. And there's this assumption that comes from the madman days of the simplicity and, pamphlets and brochures, right? And how much time do you want to spend proving people wrong and go into this tug of war? I feel like this is the very essence of the credit within, the world of attribution that shapes people, you or me who did this, right? Rather than, help people understand how you contribute to us winning together. And that's a different mindset. And when people feel that, the questions of headcount do not come up nearly as often because they can see that you are helping them to be successful. But I know for some people, it's really hard to step back and say, please be in the limelight. I am here to enable you, to empower you, to help drive the business forward, because that's what we're all here to do. Otherwise, we all go home and don't get paid.
Yeah, it's so true. I just wish there was more of that mission critical association to marketing and to the branding stuff that Daryl just talked about. It's mission critical to have these new features in the product and on the roadmap. Why isn't it also mission critical for us to invest in brand and shorten our sales cycle and lower CAC? And so anyways, I know I'm preaching to the query here. Let's chat about attribution and like the definition of the word itself. I think that there's something to unpack here, because you kind of mentioned one of the thesis or the ideas behind the 2025 State of Marketing Attribution Report was that you kept seeing on LinkedIn all these like talking heads saying, attribution is dead. And when most people hear the term attribution, they immediately go to multi-touch attribution, MTA, and this like whole world of assigning credit. And I can't blame those people because, I was in that camp not too long ago myself before a lot of the guests that I had on the show in this big exploration that I did on MTA. And they kind of like opened or enlightened me a little bit. And I can't blame those people because like if you were to Google, well, we'll put up some screenshots here, but like if you Google or ask ChatGPT, like what is marketing attribution? You get what you expect. Like marketing attribution is the process of identifying, assigning credit to marketing touch points. If you ask ChatGPT, what is attribution in the context of marketing? And marketing attribution is figuring out which touch points influence the customer's decisions. So right away, Google and ChatGPT, they're both thinking that by asking attribution, you're thinking of MTA. But MTA is just one of the methods of attribution. Attribution means figuring out what marketing efforts drove revenue or business outcomes. You're connecting spend to or campaigns to revenue. And when you kind of like coin it like that with ChatGPT, like, no, I didn't ask you for the definition of multi-touch attribution. I was asking marketing attribution. Isn't MTA just one of those methods? Got it. Yeah, you're right. Let's zoom out. Marketing attribution is
It's
the
agreeable. It
discipline.
always agrees with
Yeah,
you.
always. Yeah. But yeah, so when someone writes one of those posts and you saw those like attribution is being dead, for the folks that know that attribution is just like the discipline of tying marketing to revenue, they look a bit silly by saying attribution is dead, right? But my question to you is that like there is an argument, and you kind of talk about this in the report. There is an argument when it comes to the question of is multi-touch attribution dead, or what's the meaningfulness of it? Because this whole method of assigning credit and creating, like you said, this internal tug of war over credit between sales and marketing. So what advice do you have for shifting the mindset from blaming, credit claiming to using like attribution for learning and decision making? Long-winded question there. What are your thoughts there, Nadia?
I think if we take a step back and kind of first assess what is attribution in general, it's a framework. Business is built on frameworks. You have to have frameworks. None of them are perfect. George Box's quote comes to mind: all models are flawed, some are more useful than others, right? But it's a framework, and it's a tool to answer certain questions. And I feel like when the concept became popularized and democratized by all of these tools that had an MTA, some sort of MTA or attribution module in them. Think about Google Ads. It had its own thing. It will tell you how your campaigns are performing, right? Then you look at HubSpot. They had something. You have Marketo. You have Salesforce, like Meta. Everybody had some kind of attribution tool, ABM platforms that allowed you to see how well that platform is driving whatever it is that you're driving with that platform, right? And it democratized this concept and it simplified it, where they said, oh, this is for everyone. This is so simple. A no data scientist can do it, no problem. And I understand that. But we have to be mindful about things that are free with purchase, right? I went to a makeup store, got some makeup, and they said, today we have this promotion. We're giving out lipstick. It's free with purchase. She shows me the colors, and they're the most hideous colors, but they're free. Take it, right? I mean, I took it. It's not that I'm going to use it, but it's the same kind of concept, right? Because you're given it for free. It's not there to be precise, to embody how the framework came about. And it's a data science framework, right? It's a methodology developed by data scientists. So for you to be able to even configure all of your stuff right, where it's not just the HubSpot's eye of Mordor looking into the universe that HubSpot can see, or the Google eye of Mordor, right? Seeing the whole Mordor using the Lord of the Rings framework, right? You have to see the entire Middle Earth. And can you see that? No, you can't. You can see slivers of it. So I feel like a lot of people tried that. And as I was talking to people, during the kind of the data compilation part of the research, I noticed that on the SMB side, that is very prevalent. And why is it so? It's because in SaaS companies, smaller companies, usually have one person who is doing demand gen and a little bit of MarOps and dabbles with systems, right? And that person has to be the jack of all trades. who is, by the way, master of none. But we don't want to say that second part, right? Jack of all trades. You have to be good at everything. And then you never get it 100% because you're lacking resources. Your data is all over the place, and there's just not enough time in the day to even dedicate to data, right? You may not be able to understand the business questions that you ask and translate that into the types of data that you want to collect to build the model and the framework that works. So like the failure rate is so high, but you have all these businesses, small and medium size, that are numerous, that are out there, that all tried things, and they just came up with disappointments and they're disillusioned. And their boss says, well, what are the results of this? Well, it doesn't work. It's dead. I tried and I just couldn't come up with anything that's meaningful, right? They get laughed out of the rooms, the sales doesn't believe, and just goes on and on and on and on. Now, well, actually, I will make one more comment here. And I've had some good friends of mine that come from that world, that grew up in the world of smaller business, technology, very data savvy. They're like, this is just nonsense. And they're very convinced. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not going to argue with you, because what's the point? I understand you lived in the world of Google Ads your entire life. You drove digital stuff. You never worked for enterprise, and you never had those conversations that required you to present some kind of a framework and drive the argument, or like this, kind of debate style discussion from the point of view of a framework, right? However, when you look at enterprises, in the report, it says 75 or somewhere, almost 8 out of 10 enterprises still use multi-touch attribution. They don't have a problem with that. And they got their 15 to 17 platforms on average that all are collecting data. They have resources, they have analysts, they have data scientists that can configure, set things up. They have technology. If they don't have data science, they have technology that's more advanced. That's not the free lipstick with purchase, right? That you set up specifically for your go-to market. And for those enterprises, another interesting thing was that they don't use just one model, MTA, right? They would use multiple, because there are multiple questions that they want to answer. And again, it's not like I feel like the market goes into this panacea mode, right? ABM, it was, ABM saved us, right? Didn't save us. Then it's SEO, then, well, actually the other way around. Then it's AI, right? And then there's this disillusionment comes, like the Gartner hype cycle. It's such a great concept to visualize that. And I feel like MTA was that. Like, finally, I can justify my things. Oh, wait. This doesn't match. The tool says that my attributed revenue is twice the size of my pipeline in Salesforce. And I never bothered to look. Oh, maybe I don't even have a seat because I'm in a small business and, I don't need a seat in Salesforce. I go with my spreadsheet or my HubSpot report to the meeting with sales and, quarterly, and they laugh at me because their pipeline is half, right? Like all of those nuances. And I have lived that life. And I saw that I've been in small companies, I've been in big companies. There's a huge difference. There's a huge difference in how you even drive this narrative. And if you're reporting into a CMO, and in my case, my last 2 roles, I was reporting into the CMO, and being that arm to create the reporting, to help drive data stewardship, to translate what it is that they're being asked into numbers and, the other way around, that's a very different approach. You learn to appreciate methodologies, and they're flawed. If they were 100%, everybody could do it. Right? Everybody out of high school could take a job and be a marketer. Vibe marketing is there. That might do it.
Totally.
But, it's essentially, you have to be responsible with the data that you have, and responsible in a way where you understand what it means. You understand the limitations. You set those expectations with others who may be less data savvy or may not have the kind of the sophistication needed. And this is in no way negative, right? But sophistication meaning like the depth of knowledge within the industry. And you help them understand, you help them bridge the gap. And if you don't have that data stewardship or that data acumen, and you don't know how to help people see that, it doesn't matter what framework you use, it will all fall apart eventually.
This episode is brought to you by MoEngage and their new warehouse native CEP, which revolutionizes the way data should be seamlessly fetched, analyzed, and activated. Now you can use MoEngage Cloud Data Sync to sync your warehouse data with MoEngage and use it to segment audiences or personalize messages without any development. Just set and forget. Use MoEngage warehouse segments to create segments on your warehouse data without moving underlying events, properties, or proprietary segmentation logic, and activate them directly on MoEngage. Using warehouse data analytics, brands can also directly generate insights from their warehouse data. Your long search solution for seamless data sync, smarter segmentation, dynamic personalization, and delightful customer experiences ends here. Warehouse native CEP from MoEngage, making it easy, smart, and secure. Learn more at moengage.com. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Knack. I have the amazing pleasure of chatting with some of the greatest minds in marketing operations, but you'd be shocked at how many of them have the same issues when it comes to their campaign creation process. They're dealing with things like scaling, personalization, keeping assets on brand, render testing emails, working in rigid templates, and worst of all, having to hand code emails. But many of the leaders in the space are using Knack to eliminate these headaches. Knack is a no-code email and landing page creation platform that covers initial campaign requests right until the sync to your marketing automation platform. Knack improves the whole campaign creation process by bringing the building, optimization, testing, collaboration, and also translation functions all in a single spot. So you don't have to jump around and coordinate feedback between a bunch of different people or wait on developers for very simple edits. Because at the end of the day, marketing ops folks want to focus on process and efficiency. Marketers want to focus on creativity, and Knack makes sure you get both and then some. Check them out at knack.com. That's KNAK, and tell them we sent you.
I like to think about it two ways. Like on one hand, you have the big boardroom story where you have multi-touch attribution, and you must explain to the board why what you did with your budget was so successful. And, no hate to that. A lot of marketers get put in that position. We gave you all this money. Prove it, show us what you did with it. So they say, okay, MTA. And then there's the other side, which is the actual practitioner side, where people know, just like you said, that, MTA is a directional tool that gives you data about what's happening. And then you must decide what to do with it. And, not only is it not going to be 100%, I love what you said. You use multiple models. It could be time decay, U-shaped, linear, whatever, or even different implementation models to try to get a direction or of what to do. Because at the end of the day, that's what really matters to practitioners. What are we going to do next? And I think that's the people really using attribution in the right way are thinking in that way. But anyway, I'd love to talk about maybe some success stories. Times when you've helped teams or maybe yourself, go through this culture shift of hey, let's not just look at MTA as a panacea. Let's not just blame other teams. Can you share, kind of a real time that you've helped teams through this?
For sure. So in my previous role, this is the GovTech world. This is the world of messiest data as it is. Just because from the contact standpoint, you get your stakeholders that get voted in and out of office any given day of the year, regardless of how ZoomInfo updates the world of contacts and data integrity, right? You have the world of non-matching domains. You have 60,000 plus records if you have the entire US database of counties, cities, towns, agencies. And then there's the Canadian side. So this world of endless deduping, matching, obsolete, no longer there kind of contact world was essentially my playground. And we were driving an ABM theme go-to-market, right? Because governments buy in groups. It's a buying group. It's a committee. So you have to be able to collect the journey across the buying cycle, whether it's 18 months, sometimes it was 24 months. So think about it. For 24 months, before you close anything, you have to be able to tell the story quarter after quarter of what marketing did. Our sales cycle was 9 opportunity stages long. I've seen some companies in the competitive world in that space that were 13 stages within the sales cycle, right? The nuances there, right? So depending on what segment it was, because it was such a huge market, and no matter how much budget you have, the budget is still finite. I mean, this is a mid-sized company, with very responsible and curious investors, the P companies behind it, that wanted to absolutely understand how their money was working. And for different segment, the go-to-market was different. You have smaller counties, and you have, that engage a certain way, and they drive a certain size of the opportunity. You have bigger counties, or you have bigger DMVs within the country. We're selling to DMVs as well. that take forever to close. People leave office, new person comes in, got to start the whole thing all over again. The Canadian government is even better. It takes forever to get things kind of over the finish line, right? So you're looking at that very long spectrum. And depending on what your goal is, whether it's expansion into the new market within a certain segment, you would use a different model. So for us, First Touch was absolutely it when we were trying to figure out who are the new contacts that we can market to within this specific segment, within the channels that we go to market through. Whether it's events, we did over 100 events. It's like any marketer's nightmare, 100 events. My events person was busy. She loved it, but she was busy, right? And you have to justify all of that. And then you flip that model to understand, like, okay, so if our goal is not penetrating this new market segment and say First Touch is what I want to look at, just to understand how good am I within this specific channel? Should I spend more money on it? Am I driving that first-time engagement from this channel? We had this specific channel, which was small counties in the Southeast. And we've noticed that the dynamic was there, that if you have a conversation with them at an event, and then it didn't matter what you did in between from the digital standpoint, whether you sent them emails, whether you show them ads, but if you get them to attend a webinar on demand, because they would never attend it live because they did not want to show their interest too implicitly because they did not want a salesperson to follow up. But they thought that if they attended on demand, it's got like this veil of, I'm still staying anonymous, even though they still fill out the form, right? So they would attend it on demand. Then the BDR follows up, and absolutely, it's the beginning of a conversation. So that's a perfect example of your U model, right? You have this first very specific channel-related touch. You have to talk to them at an event. If you said, we should invest more in events, it would do absolutely nothing, because what we notice for that region, you have to have them on a webinar where they give you another hour of their life. They kind of, you grow on them. Then you continue talking to them, then the BDR calls and they feel like they already know you. And that concept of like trust and kind of having a relationship for that specific market was so important that you could do whatever you wanted outside of these two channels and invest however much you wanted. Your CAC would go through the roof. But see, in this specific case, I feel like the dichotomy of reporting versus analytics comes to mind, where reporting is just whatever number you log into your tool and it says, this week, LinkedIn performed, out of this world. You should invest more in LinkedIn. That's reporting. You have the finite pivot table of something versus something, and you see what it is, and there's nothing you can do about it. Analytics is where you dive deeper. You investigate, and you kind of try to understand what's working, what's not working, and how is it nuanced based on, name the scenario, right? So this is the way I think about using attribution, not as a means to an end. This is how much revenue I did, and it's all marketing sourced, good job to me. It's rather, can I get curious with my data? Can I apply these frameworks to get answers to very different questions? And then you bring those answers to the executive meeting, and they're like, oh, this actually makes sense. I trust you now because I understand what you're doing without diving into like, what's the weight over here? Or how is the value distributed? Like, you're going to get them lost. So that would be one of those practical examples.
Yeah.
Super cool. One thing, Nadia, that we wanted to chat about, like we've seen a lot of measurement methodologies kind of shift away from touch-based weights to more probabilistic weights. So less credit distribution and more about pattern recognition and analytics. In the State of 2025 Attribution report that you guys did, you highlighted chain-based attribution models, specifically Markov chains, as this like next evolution of multi-touch. So I spent a bit of time like researching this. This was the first time I heard about chain-based, and as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong here and how you guys see this, but chain-based promises to be able to look at the entire sequence of touches in real buyer journeys. And then it uses probabilistic data to figure out which touch points are most influential. But the looks at all the touch points in real journeys, like that statement alone was a red flag to me in my research. Like, I don't believe that we can measure or see the entire sequence. There's always going to be touches that are not trackable. And you called this out in the report too, like lots of companies are investing in dark social. All of our partners on the podcast invest in podcast ads. There's exec dinners, there's private Slack group recommendations. Like none of those things are going to show up in any MTA model, chain-based, Markov or not. So if we know that we don't have all the touch points and we're never going to have all the touch points, and that we, in some cases, are missing perhaps the touch point that may have led to the conversion, what use is it really to have MTA data that doesn't accurately tell us if a campaign was incremental or not?
I love the skepticism, and I think it's very healthy, and I think a lot of the audience shares it, right? They're like, how do I know, right? But that's just the nature of the business. You never know
Yeah.
100%. However, to your point, um, the concept of chain-based, it's very much, I think it's very aligned with account-based marketing and measuring account-based marketing and tracking the entire journey, right? The idea of buying groups and people doing certain things. What it does, if you take the regular event-based model within the MTA and you realize that there's a lot of noise in this model. I know that I have to stay present, say on LinkedIn or in Google Ads or whatever, but I know that these things are just incremental touches. They don't really make the difference. But then I have sales engagement over here. I have BDR calls. I have maybe event attendance or whatever those channels that most enterprises use to go to market, right? Because these are not like after hours, let me go on TikTok and see what everybody's doing for IT automation orchestration solutions. Like it doesn't happen that way. It's more predictable. Then it allows you to figure out what channels matter and how you can suppress the noise from other channels. It could be unique to a specific market segment, like what I described with, the small counties that I experienced. It could be unique to certain industry, it could be unique to certain area of the world, like whatever it is. But that is absolutely true that depending on how you go to market and what offerings you have, people will engage with those differently. And once you start paying attention to your data and you kind of start diving deeper into the analytics, again, having the sophistication, the understanding, and kind of the critical assessment of what you're seeing, you will notice that certain things don't matter. Good example from, my previous life. Again, within the government world, we had healthy skepticism that email opens and email clicks did not really mean anything. Because when somebody's sitting in the office and just, has time to kill, they might read your email. Doesn't mean that they're trying to buy anything. They just have the time to go through their inbox, right? So, email touches had to be suppressed. Or certain emails that would have newsletter in the title, right? In the traditional attribution model, you would include all of that and it's just, one of the touch points. In the when you assign weights, you would either give a 0 weight or you would just exclude it altogether. So it's more sophisticated kind of approach that allows you to choose what matters for your market. But to your point about the dark social, and actually before this podcast, I looked up the term because I'm like, who coined this? Like, what is? I mean, I thought maybe Six Sense or Chris Walker or whoever was
Chris
like one of
Walker,
the
yeah, he's the one I would think of.
wrong. So
Interesting.
that was 2012, and it was The Atlantic. I used to read The Atlantic when I was doing my grad school, right? And that was a journalist. Didn't even come from a marketer. How can this not come from a marketer? It was a journalist who was trying to write an article on all the things where people go for advice that kind of go outside of the area of what you can see right away. So that's where the term comes in.
Interesting.
And I actually had a funny story. We were, this was a meeting of marketing and sales. This was a 6-month meeting, kind of figure out what we're doing for the second half of the year. And we knew that events were so important, at least for the sales team. They wanted to do more of them. The board did not want to give us more money to do more events. And the question to me was like, well, can you tell us what we get out of events? And I ran I pulled the data from Marketo. I looked at everything in Salesforce, all of my campaigns, made this massive chart and gave it to ChatGPT. Say, hey, can you tell me, based on the date stamp, how does this all relate? Because I was trying essentially to do the kind of the manual way of figuring out how do event touches related to opportunities. This was before we had CaliberMind. And I couldn't. So when the sales asked for more events, I said, based on the touch points that I have, I cannot tell you that we are making a meaningful difference with these events. But we are. Such and such anecdotal knowledge, like, did such and such put the lead into Salesforce? And the salesperson looks at me and goes, you're telling me that in 2023 or 2024, I still have to manually go into Salesforce. We don't have some kind of an automation system to capture contacts from events. And I was stupefied. I'm thinking, are you thinking Alexa, married to Zoom Info, automatically running things as it listening on your phone, who you're talking? Like, there's this element that you still have to do the work. There's no way around it. There's no magic bullet. Like, you're having your dinner, Well, how hard is it to enter the names of the people, create a campaign for it, put the names of those who did the dinner? Now you could say, well, how about LinkedIn? Sure, LinkedIn could be more difficult to measure. But what do you think drives certain wonderful things from LinkedIn engagements that you cannot capture? And if that's the case, then you're answering a different question. Do you see that in LinkedIn analytics? Do you see it in Google Analytics? What makes you think that there's this impact outside of your gut feel or, this anecdotal knowledge? So there's still that, creative inquiry into what are you trying to solve for? And should you stand paralyzed until you solve for it? Because what's the cost of opportunity of doing nothing?
Totally, totally. And I think that this is why, this is why rules exist and why we can't have nice things is because there's these bad apples that think that they don't have to do anything, and that Alexa, like you
There's
said,
a lot of them.
there's a lot of them. So you have to like put all these guardrails in place that maybe, you wish you wouldn't have to. But can I ask a follow-up question on that Markov,
Sure.
chain model? I understand that, different than like a linear model where everything gets credit, you're actually removing the ones that don't make sense. How about the order of the touch points? Is that important? And, how, if so, how do you determine like what order of touch points actually makes sense? Or am I reading that wrong and the order doesn't matter?
No, see, that's where the kind of the I don't think it's a noun, customability, but customizing the whole model and how it applies to your go-to market would come from. Like clearly, this is not something that you would just cook up in house, right? And say, no, data science, I'm going to paralyze you guys for the next 6 months because we're coming up with this big project and that's all we're going to do, right? That's something clearly that you have to use adequate resources. For example, within CaliberMind, our team helps people set this up based on how go to market. So they first explain their process, you understand what matters, and then you set it up in a way where you will change it based on what you see coming in. And one interesting thing is we were kind of putting that section together. I happened to talk to Michelle Garner, who is a senior data scientist from Microsoft. And the woman is amazing. She's so knowledgeable. And I was curious. I was like, well, in the world of all of these things, attribution is dead, use MMM. MMM is dead, use incrementality, right? Like, can you tell me how you guys think about it? They actually did a presentation at Marketing Analytics Summit. And she said that at Microsoft, they actually run an advanced Markov chain multi-touch attribution model to help their teams make decisions. And again, this is Microsoft. I know that they got, hundreds upon hundreds of analysts and machine learning people. Like, we're not trying to equate that to regular smaller business, but it kind of sets the tone of people with depth and knowledge and expertise still say that, this matters and we see value in it so that we could make decisions that are custom to our business. And I feel like that was part of like why everything else out of the box failed, because it's out of the box.
Yeah.
If two businesses went to market the same way, they would not be able to compete, right? Like they start changing how they go to market, and that's your competitive advantage. But how is it that we don't change how the tools measure how we go to market? And when I think about these things, I think about like what other methodologies are there in business that could be scrutinized? I think about the pipeline, sales pipeline, right? Nobody ever scrutinizes sales pipeline. It's holy. Like you don't touch sales pipeline. But think about the Salesforce probabilities, 10% versus 20% versus 50%. It is so biased based on what the sales guy is thinking at the moment.
Yeah.
And then you look at the stages. I've seen businesses, like I said, with 3 stages. I've seen businesses with 12 stages. And how these stages change, it's up to the rep. If this happened, band qualification, MEDPIC qualification, you change the stage, but it's very, very biased, right? Nobody ever scrutinizes that. And everybody puts a lot of attention on getting that right. I'm thinking like, why is it that this framework is non-touchable? Nobody says, we're going to scrap pipeline. We're going to come up with, I don't know, GPS journey for sales, whatever it might be, right? I'm just coming up with stuff on the fly. It doesn't happen. But with marketing, like we're always looking for the next best thing because we tried, didn't go in depth, didn't put much effort sometimes into it, tried something out of the box, and then off we go to the next thing. And I don't know the answer to that, but I've noticed that it differs very much amongst bigger businesses that respect process and methodology because they understand that's how they survive. That's the continuity of operations. And small businesses, they're just like, throw spaghetti at the wall and just see what sticks and go get different type of pasta and try it again.
Yeah, it's a really interesting comparison, the pipeline percentages and how confident you are. I think the difference there for me is that it's like it's a bit fluid, it's dynamic. Like I know reps that they change that percentage like based on the number of emails they get. I've created a couple Zapier flows where the percentage actually changes based on like the time it takes for them to reply to an email in a certain sales cycle. So but it's an interesting comparison, and I think like one of the themes that comes out of the report, and maybe some of the stuff that you're seeing is that like MTA isn't perfect because we don't have like a way to see the entire journey. It's always going to be invisible stuff, like the dark social stuff. But I feel like one of the main takeaways is that like perfect is the enemy of good in this case here. And I want to unpack that a little bit because in the report you mentioned that one of the core reasons why MTA fails is underdocumented and offline touch points. You kind of talked about that in your previous answer. You're having a VIP exec dinner with 7 people. Why didn't you log that in Salesforce? Like there's ways for us to capture that data. And you know, there's some ways of making sure that this happens, but you know, when important buying moments aren't documented, you mentioned in the report that attribution reports are inaccurate, and we totally agree there. But then in the trends reshaping attribution section, you mentioned that measurement may never be perfect, but marketers shouldn't let perfect be the enemy of good, and that sometimes approximation can be used as a signal, and that estimates matter more than precision. So this is where Daryl was talking about like using direction, MTA for direction, knowing that it's not perfect, but like, hey, at least we have something. We're going in this direction, right? The question I have for you, Nadia, is like, I think perfection will never be achieved in any online trackable mechanisms because we are humans after all. And if I ask you, Nadia or Daryl, like why you made your last 10 purchases, you probably couldn't even pinpoint the exact moment that triggered that purchase. Our memories are faulty. We have, you know, tons of biases involved in it. But how do we know for sure that when it comes to measurement, that what we are measuring is good enough? Like, what is good enough? And how do we know that it can be used as direction versus when it's inaccurate to the point and it's incomplete the direction it tells us to go in isn't going to be correct? And so, like, maybe perfect is the enemy of good, like we kind of talked about, but in this case, the scarier part is that inaccuracy is also the corruption of good. And what you think is good enough maybe isn't good enough. Like there's a super fine line between accepting imprecision and falling victim to something that's completely inaccurate. How can marketers strike that balance, Nadia? Like, how do you use data that's good enough to guide us, knowing that, like, when incomplete data might sometime mislead us?
I think that's a very valid question. And I think if we start with a traditional tech stack setup, if we're talking digital world, the things that we can capture, right? If you continue looking at individual systems and what they show, like you will never get there. You will be continuously imperfect, inaccurate, double counting. Like I will not take a stab at any of the platforms, but the hearsay is that every platform will inflate a little bit what it's showing you because you're investing money with it. So it has to show
Yeah.
you that it's making a difference, right? So all of those nuances, none of that is connected to your sales or even business bloodline, whether it's your, ERP or your CRM, whatever it is. So you're continuously fighting windmills. And like you either choose to go with that and create this tolerance of like, okay, I know this is like my daily existence and I have to do it and it's all in spreadsheets. So I have some kind of a, you know, attribution light setup that helps me with some, not all. Like you have to develop that tolerance to deal with it. Like I would not want to be there. I've definitely been in those shoes. Like, how I became a client of a tool like CaliberMind, and there are others there. I'm not here to promote the tool, but essentially bigger businesses decide that they need to have data stewardship, data literacy, data leadership around how do we deal with this massive data. We bring it all together, and that's the whole. I mean, this could be a commercial for any CDP or any data warehouse. Like you have to have it there. Can you bring it from all places? Like you will be probably 70, 80, 90% where you need to be with 10% missing. Oh, I don't know the performance of my billboard. what would it change if you knew? And how much, difference would it cause? Like certain things, right? I'm not skeptical of all the things.
Hmm.
And then on the other flip side of it, something that I heard from the former CMO of Mailchimp, I think she's now CMO at WP Engine. She was talking about how enterprises buy when it comes to complex solutions. I'm not talking about staple stuff. I'm not necessarily even talking Martech. Think IT, things cybersecurity, think finance stuff, right? It would never come from Google Click because you just don't wake up one day and say, "Hey Google, what is the best cybersecurity yada yada yada," right? Chances are you would go and seek for that information through more predictable for the marketer of that enterprise and that product channels because they're out there. You would join communities, you would go to webinars, you would go to events. Like it's a more predictable path. Am I oversimplifying it, completely kind of negating the notion of ads? I mean, maybe a little bit, but you kind of get the idea. Where staple products, the decisions are made quickly and you go to Google or chat or whatever it is, right? Like, give me this. And that's the beginning and the end of your journey. In e-commerce, it flourishes. This notion of quick sale is there. But when you're talking about 12 months, 18 months, don't tell me that most of your data points are missing from the CRM, because if you do, I'll say we need someone else for the team. What were you doing for the last 12 months? We were running all of these different campaigns, right? So you can collect more data than you realize what you can collect. But I think people focus on what they can't collect, and it becomes the beginning and the end. I'm like, cannot move further because this over here, I cannot bring it in. So I think this notion of how much do you need to make a decision is a very important thing. And then the other side of it, if you isolate sales, which most of the tools that we talked about do not consider anything sales related, you're creating this rift like, I am doing my thing, this is marketing, you're doing your thing over there, and I don't care how many calls you place, how many hands you shook, how many babies you kissed, right? I'm just doing my thing, tracking Google ad touches. Like, people get offended.
Yeah.
People don't believe you. Like, talk about, ruining trust. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, it's so true. Like all the terms about marketing influenced pipeline, like salespeople just hate that term because they're like, yeah, we know what you're doing, but I closed that deal. I kissed these 7 babies. Like I
Exactly.
am the person responsible for this sale, and we're not disagreeing
Let them
with
see
that.
themselves. Let them see themselves on that journey, right? Like
Yeah.
once it's a collaborative effort, you don't even get the scrutiny around it all. You prove your point. You show touches. You show how sales got involved. And look at, you need us. We need you. We win together. And the argument goes out of the door. But that's not how the adage goes. It's marketing influence, which those sometimes could be fighting words.
Yeah. No, I asked Nadia again, and I find this super fascinating because like I run the podcast, and like I live off of like the ads that we generate from sponsors, right? And selling sponsorship on podcast ads is one of those dark social things. Like it doesn't show up on MTA models. It might show up sometimes in like post-sale conversations and surveys, but it's one of those things where like I've been in the shoes of someone trying to convince marketing leaders to invest in this and create brand affinity and like associate themselves with like, solo creators in the space. And they're just like, a lot of these teams see it as completely experimental budget. They can't track it in their MTA model. So like it's not even a conversation starter with them. And so like I've become obsessed with this notion of just like, if it doesn't show up in your MTA model, it might still be super important to the bottom line. Like and it's hard because like not everyone remembers they heard an ad on a podcast. But yeah, I appreciate your color
No,
there.
I believe that. I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's a great example of how every business goes to market differently. And your industry is very unique. Like how many others just like you? I mean, you can probably count people on, your hands and your toes, and that would be it, right? It's a small market. So it is nuanced and it's very relationship driven. So I would say, definitely you're looking for things that may not fall within the traditional lines. But for more predictable, large scale businesses, it's a lot of it is very measurable. A lot of it is very trackable because these businesses have learned to exist over decades, and it's the motion that continues going. So it's a little bit of a different go-to-market.
Can we talk about like RevOps and data leadership real quick? Like, how does RevOps play into this whole marketing attribution thing? Like, who owns it? Have you ever given some thought, and what have you seen? Like, is there a function that best owns attribution? Is it like analytics? Is it revenue ops? Is it marketing ops? And then what can operations teams do in general to make sure that organizations are successful, or at least get off to the right start when implementing multi-touch attribution?
That is such a loaded question. There are like so many layers to that question. I love it.
Yep.
I think if you step out of just the one functional team, which is RevOps, and think about what is the methodology of how marketing helps the broader go-to-market team move the needle? What is the process for our funnel, our stages, our channels, our campaign nomenclature and naming conventions, all of these things, right? Like I always say that the success of any marketing or any ABM or any demand gen tactic starts and stops with marketing operations. I mean, I've led marketing operations teams, and I know that if you don't have that excellence in how you bring things together, everything else is just secondary, right? You just cannot undo it after the fact. And once you have that established and the business is clear, just like RevOps is clear on the sales pipeline stages, they would be clear on the marketing funnel, whether it's your lead funnel, whether it's your account funnel. Maybe you have both, and there's some, cross-pollination between how, people flow into accounts and whatever that is, whatever that complexity is. Making it clear, I think that's step number one, even before you touched anything attribution related. And I remember hearing this on a podcast from someone who is with the Association of National Advertisers. They have a CMO practice, and they were talking about a research that they ran when it came to metrics and how marketers or heads of marketing establish the metrics that marketing will deliver on to your KPIs, your OKRs, right? So they got 120 marketers in the room, and these are all CMOs, VPs of marketing, and said, can you come up with the most important marketing metric that matters to you, that you measure, right? So 120 people came up with 98 different metrics. Then the same practice took 30 CEOs, and I guess the difference in size is because, it's harder to get a CMO in the room. They're busy people, but that's my speculation. They took 30 CEOs and they said, what are the most important metrics for the business that you want to measure? They came up with 3. And when they heard that the marketing bunch came up with 98, they were mad. I would use a different word, but it would not be probably appropriate here, right? They were mad. They're like, and this is the nonsense that's happening on that side of the house? How is this possible, right? So I feel like just having that clarity of aligning what it is that you are doing to what matters for the business, so you do speak the same language, whether it's the language of the hard dollar or whatever it is the intermediate metric is, right? That is important. And then attribution, where does it live? It can live in marketing operations if that's all you got, and your marketing operations person is data savvy and has the kind of the affinity for statistical methodologies. And I'm not talking like advanced stuff. I'm just talking understanding and being able to interpret the data, right? If you have marketing analytics team, I mean, it could live there. Marketing analysts, they're amazing people. They're super savvy people. They would probably go and, build things and extract things that you never thought existed. But if all you got, say, is, RevOps, and your RevOps person is it, and has what the MOps person had in the previous example, the marketing analyst, it really depends on the person's tolerance of uncertainty and being able to work with data in marketing analytics. I think that's where it matters the most. And the marketing leader understanding what it is that they're trying to achieve and sending down those directions to people who are actually boots on the ground, who are looking at things, connecting things, so that the story comes back in a way that you would expect.
Super cool, Nadia. Really appreciate your take on that, and appreciate you going through the conversation there and humoring our skepticism a little bit.
It was fun. You guys are a tough bunch.
We'll link out to the state of attribution report, because I think the periodic table is super cool. The work that you guys did to kind of promote that is also really great. We'll try to figure out, like, for the cover, like a little periodic table theme to this episode here.
That'd be cool.
We got one last question for you, Nadia. You're obviously VP of marketing, you're a keynote speaker, frequent traveler. You're also a mother of 2, a Ridgeback parent, an avid runner, occasional triathlete, and amateur new age pianist. One question we ask everyone on the show is, how do you remain happy and successful in your career? And how do you find balance between all the things you're working on while staying happy?
See, I have this philosophy that the most valuable thing that you have is time. And how you spend your time and who you give your time to is ultimately what makes you happy and makes you feel accomplished, right? So when I look back at my day and I know that all of these things that you just named, I did what I needed to do. I dedicated time. I had the discipline to do all of these things in order. And somebody would call me, obsession of the calendar person, right? But it's true. Once I have the collection of all these things that matter to me, I feel fulfilled. Like I feel like I spent my day and it did not get wasted because that's one less day that I have. And sometimes it is a lot of things, but as you go through your meetings on your LinkedIn or on your Outlook calendar or your Google calendar, right? You just feel like, okay, that was a good day. I feel like that at the end of the day, once I hit all of my things, if it means getting up at 4:30 in the morning, I mean, that's what it means to be happy, right? Then you would have to go to bed earlier. But it's balancing all of those things and making sure that my time was spent wisely and people that I invested in or things that I invested in were really the ones that nurture my soul. That's my secret to happiness.
I love it. How do you handle like saying no to conversations that you already know are not gonna like be fulfilling to you? Like how do you gently say no to those things?
So I actually had an interview not so long ago, and the person was very excited for the role, and it was not the right fit. And I said, listen, I'm going to tell you something that you're not going to like, but I'll just save you the time because time is valuable. I don't think you're going to be a fit. And the person did not expect that direct of a feedback. But to me, it was being gracious and actually having mercy on not stringing them
Yeah.
along. Like, dude, I will tell you why this does not work. And I will
100%.
explain this to you because it would be worse if you're on the other side of the fence many months, weeks, whatever later, right? And you realize that. So they appreciated that. But sometimes it's just saying things as they are, which may not be the most popular methodology. We try to sugarcoat, but I always say that the one skill, and I live in the South, right? So we sugarcoat everything. But the one skill that I'm very adamant to learn better is how to sugarcoat things. I just go straight for the chase.
Awesome. Great advice. Nadia, really appreciate your time. Like I said, we'll share out to the link to the report there. You guys did a great job at putting that together. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is super fun.
Yeah, thank you guys. It was fun.